Welcome back to ShubhCode. Today is episode 2 of the Apex Interview Questions series. Topic: Apex Trigger Interview Questions, Order of Execution and Recursion. The trigger questions that separate senior Salesforce developers from the rest. These are the questions that real interviewers at top Salesforce firms ask. Let's go. Here are the questions we're answering today. What is the Salesforce order of execution? Then, before trigger versus after trigger. When to use which then? How do you prevent trigger recursion? Then, one trigger per object. Why and how? Then, what happens when a trigger calls a trigger? Stay for the last one. It's the most important. Let me explain this simply. An Apex trigger is just a piece of code that runs before or after a database event. The most important thing to know as a senior developer is the order of execution. When someone clicks Save, Salesforce does system validations, then runs before triggers, then saves to the database, but doesn't commit, then runs after triggers, then workflow rules and flows, and finally commits. If anything fails, the entire thing rolls back. Now you might be wondering, why do workflow rules run after the before and after triggers? This is the most common senior Apex trigger question and the most important to get exactly right. Interviewers listen for specific phases and they notice if you skip any. Here is the complete order. First, the system loads the original record from the database, or initializes it for a new record. Second, the new values from the save request are loaded on top. Third, system validation runs, required fields, data types, foreign key checks. Fourth, Apex before triggers fire. Fifth, system duplicate rules run. Sixth, the record is saved to the database but not yet committed. Seventh, Apex after triggers fire. Eighth, assignment rules fire. Ninth, auto-response rules. 10th, workflow rules. And if any field is updated by workflow, the before and after triggers run again. 11th, processes and flows built in Flow Builder. 12th, escalation rules. 13th, entitlements. And finally, the transaction commits to the database. If anything in this chain throws an uncaught exception, the entire commit rolls back. This seems basic, but the nuance is what matters. Use a before trigger when you want to modify a field on the record being saved, because in a before trigger, the record hasn't been written to the database yet. Your changes get saved as part of the original write. 0 extra DML. This is the most efficient approach. Use an after trigger when you need to work with related records, because in the after trigger, the record has been saved and has a valid record ID. You need that ID to create or update child records, relate new records to it, or send notifications that reference the full record. Using after trigger to modify the record itself means you'd need an extra update DML call. That's wasteful. Rule of thumb: same record modifications go in before. Related record operations go in after. Recursion is one of the most common bugs in Apex and one of the best interview questions because it tests real-world experience. Here's the scenario. Your after trigger updates a related record. That update fires another trigger. That trigger fires back to your original object. Infinite loop. And Salesforce has a maximum stack depth. So eventually it throws an exception and rolls back everything. The standard prevention pattern is a static Boolean variable in a handler class. A static variable persists for the entire transaction, not just one trigger invocation. At the start of your trigger, check, is this Boolean already true? If yes, we've already been here. Skip the trigger body. If no, set it to true. Run your logic. This ensures your trigger logic runs exactly once per transaction, regardless of how many times the trigger itself fires. The one trigger per object rule is a Salesforce best practice that every senior developer must be able to explain and implement. Here's why it matters. If you have multiple triggers on the same object, Salesforce does not guarantee the order they fire in. Trigger A might run before trigger B today, and trigger B might run first tomorrow. Completely non-deterministic. This makes debugging nearly impossible. The solution is a single trigger per object that delegates to handler classes. The trigger itself is just routing code. It calls an account trigger handler class and says, run the before insert logic, run the before update logic. All actual business logic lives in the handler. This makes your code testable, readable, and maintainable. New requirements? Add a new method to the handler. Never touch the trigger again. Quick recap before you go. Order of execution has 13 phases. Know them all for senior interviews. Before trigger equals modify same record with 0 extra DML. After trigger equals work with related records that need the new record ID. Recursion prevention. Static Boolean flag that persists across the full transaction. 1 trigger per object with a handler class. Non-negotiable best practice. These answers will set you apart in your next Salesforce interview. Like this video if it helped. It takes 2 seconds and helps the channel a lot. Next up, Episode 3, Apex Async, Batch versus Queueable versus Future. Interviewers love this comparison. See you tomorrow.